Welcome to episode 14 of It's About Data, the weekly podcast about data, AI, analytics, and whatever else is relevant that we want to talk about on that week. It's hosted by Half Byte Systems principal Matt Housley and Tony Bear, principal of DB Insight. And this week on episode 14, we're going to do the first of a two-part series that's really reviewing the first half of the year. We're going to look through all the vendor announcements that have come by, during the peak of the conference season over this past quarter. Take it away, Matt.
So, Tony, welcome. It's kind of fun to sit back and summarize all the announcements from this conference season because there's really been a lot. I mean, you've been in this game for a bit. Do you have the sense that this conference season is more active than most of them? I certainly am getting that from my perspective, but I wasn't at all these events.
Well, part of it is just how concentrated it is, and
Yeah,
post pandemic, everything happens in the spring. Much
yeah,
to my chagrin,
it's
as a
fair.
matter of fact,
Yeah,
because who wants to travel when it's starting to green up outside? But yeah, so it was pretty frenetic. But and I think what we've seen are a number of broad themes that have come out through all the announcements. I would say that essentially that with AI, obviously, I mean that's going to be an ongoing theme. It's really forced and basically the whole technology community to really basically up their game, and so the
yeah.
intensity of the announcements, the velocity of them has certainly picked up.
Yeah, and from my perspective, the biggest focus this season when it comes to AI was agents. It's just like agents, agents,
Yeah,
agents. Every vendor, every conference, there was some kind of agent announcement.
it was interesting because last year, I mean, you started to hear the word agents last year,
Right.
and this is where I should give Databricks some credit in that they really were first out of the mark with the
Yeah.
development framework
Yeah.
last year when we were just starting to learn how to when we were just learning this new term agentic. This
Yeah.
is the year where the rest of the world pretty much caught up, and we've started to see a number of interesting pieces come together. Of course, um, what we're also starting to see is we're starting to understand more of not just the known unknowns, but also the unknown unknowns. And so there still is plenty of white space here. But this year we've seen obviously a lot of agentic frameworks, but we've also seen a number of new sort of capabilities for trying to ground agents, for basically making agents more purpose built. I think
Yeah.
there's some broader issues. We've discussed this in other episodes, and we'll discuss them again in terms of when you have all these autonomous moving parts, how to deal with basically, especially with powered by AI models that are not deterministic, how we get a
Yes.
handle on all that.
Yeah, and I'm going to bring up what Ali Ghodsi said recently. That is, it's really hard to automate things fully. And he was talking specifically about
Yes.
agents and saying, from his perspective, agents really should be used with human oversight. And that's not necessarily the message that we're getting from everyone. So
Yeah.
we'll come back to that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, Ali had some great things to say about that, and I think that's something which we can try to talk more at length on the next
Yeah,
episode. But
yeah,
I'll go through some of this, and obviously for Google, this year, next was really the coming out party for Agent Space. So that's really their
right.
whole development environment. They also introduced some purpose built agents for BigQuery, for data science, for visualization,
Business
and I saw
analytics. Yeah,
exactly, and I saw similar moves basically from IBM and Snowflake and Databricks. So it's not surprising there, but still, at this point, I'm still a little fearful about as we make it easy to create agents, are we creating the next generation of spaghetti code?
and worse than spaghetti code because at least COBOL spaghetti code running on an old mainframe is nominally deterministic, right? Going back to the probabilistic nature of Gen AI.
Right, but it's also just documenting our tracks.
Yes. Yeah.
Today we do have technology that can do that, but it does mean that we really have to uh, really up our game there, and really look at this whole sort of life cycle governance and life cycle management of agents, which of course includes governance, and that's something which I think we're going to see as sort of a theme, probably the second half of the year and going into next year.
Yeah.
Um, Another interesting thing with Google was that they were always a company that was they built their reputation over that Google search and
Yep.
Google Ads, AdWords. It was all AI driven,
Yes.
and so Google is obviously they built their reputation on AI, and they also invented the transformer, and then kind of lost. I mean, they kind of lost their way after that. That whole team that developed the transformer pretty much left Google, and OpenAI pretty much stole their thunder. And
Yeah.
what we saw this year, and I think it was just there was probably no better showcase for this was in Las Vegas going into the Sphere and seeing some glimpses of the reimagined Wizard of Oz.
Right.
And keep in mind that there's just some of the magnitudes of all this, which is that the Sphere itself, as a screen, is 1,800 times the largest single largest IMAX screen in the world. So you don't just all of a sudden magnify the image; you have to reimagine it. You start to have to now uh, start to have to expand, the scenes, literally, which is there are characters off camera. They now need to be on camera. They're going to be more, full head to toe shots, and so it's a very and it requires incredible. I mean, it was a demonstration of the scale that Google's Gemini models can now handle. They also started boasting about their context windows, which go up to 1 million tokens. So what Google's message was that this year, baby, we're when it comes to foundation models, we're back.
Yeah. And it's funny because I think one of the legitimate critiques of Google, not just in the AI context, but more broadly, is that they become one of the conservative kind of old school vendors, right? I mean, they've obviously at this point been around for over 20 years, but they're almost in there with IBM and SAP and all these like real enterprise, core infrastructure, very slow moving. And now they're trying to reclaim that crown of being an innovator and changing quickly and reacting
Right.
to what's happening.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, part of it is the natural maturation of a company where you have to
Yeah.
start worrying about not moving fast and breaking things.
Right. Innovator's dilemma, right? Clayton Christensen, like you have a lot to lose now. When you're a young,
Right.
hungry startup, you don't have much to lose. You go out
Ex-
bankrupt, that's the usual outcome. Whereas Google makes so much money off of their existing products, it's very hard for them to
and
move.
they're also seeing generational change,
Yeah.
in terms of that, and I'm assuming I'm actually, as we speak, I'm kind of neck deep in a consulting project that I'm
Yeah.
delivering next week. And if I had to rely on Google's on just traditional search, it would have probably taken me twice as long. I mean, I've been using Copilot as
Right.
essentially a research assistant to phrase it in in natural in questions, natural conversational questions, and that greatly speeds up. It doesn't necessarily mean that I'm always getting the right answers,
That's
but
a problem.
but and that certainly is. It's the non-deterministic, basically nature of language models. But the thing is that um, Google's business, both in its core business in search and AdWords, is very much under threat with the new with the new generation of generative AI.
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
mean, so it's very much of a we need to move fast, but hopefully not by breaking too many things. Kind of move on. Snowflake was another interesting one,
Yeah.
in that the narrative the last few years is that they've been eclipsed by Databricks,
Yeah.
and a lot of it's just the natural dynamics of the market, which is that they both started around the same time, but Snowflake was originally in a much more mature market, which is data warehousing.
Right.
Databricks was in an emerging market, which is data science, data engineering, and later AI, and so a lot. It was just kind of the natural rhythm of things that Databricks is really that Snowflake's big peak growth curve was around the IPO about 5 years ago, whereas Databricks' sharp hockey stick of growth is happening right now. Um, I believe Snowflake's revenues are still higher, but what was more, I think, important this year is that with basically under a new team, basically we have the new CEO, the new sheriff's in town, and he comes to the product side. In other words, Frank Slootman, who basically got them set up for the IPO to go to market. At this point, they realized we have to get back to product. It was just product development, just kind of was on sort of autopilot the last few years, and so this year they really had to demonstrate that product development really has come back. They did come up with a number of interesting things with regard to the Cortex agents. They've started also to round out the platform with regard to data
Open flow.
ingestion,
Yep.
even actually acquiring Datavolo, which was built their whole ingestion tool around Apache NiFi. Remember that? Uh, wow.
Yeah, I'll
um,
be very curious to see where they take that, right? Because it's an
yeah,
open source project that's been around a while. It's built
right,
around more of an ETL as opposed to ELT paradigm,
right.
but they may push the open source really hard, right? Like they may evolve that project very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, it's just part of the natural expansion.
Yeah,
But also, it's interesting, and actually, I think we should probably do a separate episode on this on
yeah.
DBT because part of it is they've also now incorporated DBT workspaces
Hmm.
inside the Snowflake environment. Either and it's both the and you have the choice of just using the community open source version, which is
Right.
probably where the majority are, but also the new sort of what I'll call the MongoDB proprietary version, which is of course has been re-architected, rewritten on Rust, so it's basically more performant. But the other part also about all this is that while the narrative over Snowflake over the past few years was of a company stagnating, their customers are doubling down. They had 124% net customer retention rate, which meant that actually customers were tending, on average, to increase their investment in Snowflake by 24%.
And to me, that's a broader theme. If we look across all of these vendor announcements, and we'll get to more of them, traditional data stacks are back. And that
Yeah,
is, we've spent, the time since late 2022 talking about AI, Gen AI, but it turns out the companies really need data warehousing, and there's still a lot of on-prem traditional workload to be moved to cloud platforms.
right, and that's
Yeah.
also been kind of a theme with a lot of with all the Lakehouse announcements,
Yes.
and not just it's not just Databricks saying is putting a cap to the tabular saga with now make it off opening full support of Apache Iceberg, but
Right.
what you're finding is that these Lakehouse are now becoming more well rounded.
Yes.
They're basically they're working to collapse the modern data stack, which is including elements of of the fabric, including the catalog, including data ingest, including pipelines, transformations. You still may choose to use third party tools,
Yep.
but a lot of these the Lakehouse folks realize that if they're going to make these these gargantuan basically I guess sort of data warehouses on steroids happen, they also have to start simplifying things.
Right, and that generally is what enterprises want, right? Like they have deep pockets, but they just don't want to mess around with all these details. They want to buy a
Right,
very simple platform. And again, we'll come back to this later, but acquisitions kind of align with what you're saying too. Metaplane got acquired,
right,
Crunchy Data, Neon, Data.World, all these companies that arguably are kind of part of this modern data stack
right.
got acquired by other companies.
Oh gosh, yes.
Yeah,
And actually, part of all this, and SAP, kind of an interesting case in point,
yeah,
in that coming from CEO Christian Klein, they're now not just the applications company; they're the applications, data, and AI company. They're basically data and AI are now on the same level as
yes,
apps, and a lot of the reason for that is that the application functionality underneath, and this is actually coming from SAP, from CEO Christian Klein, is going to become commoditized. I mean, obviously the
right.
processes that it represents are not commoditized, but the application tier is going to get commoditized, especially with agents coming in. It's not that agents replace applications. It's the same thing with lake houses, where with table format is it's the means to an end. That's the commodity. The application, basically the business logic, the core business logic, whether you're doing, let's say, general ledger or something, or logistics, that itself is commodity. It's the way you configure it, basically the way you connect it. Um, that's really where the magic happens,
Right.
and
It's the
more to
automation increasingly. Yeah,
no question. And it also comes down to with SAP uh, doing a major thrust, with their lakehouse with Databricks, and
yeah,
at the same time, opens like another topic, which we can go in the next episode, which is that they're exposing their artifacts now as data products. And that actually comes as a logical progression, coming
yeah.
from having a semantic layer, which basically says this is what the data means, to a knowledge graph, essentially, which basically shows where everything is connected. And that's part of the SAP family jewels. You're not going to see SAP exposing that knowledge graph publicly. Um, and but so the icing on the cake, essentially, how you expose this would be a data product. And they're going to be certain. It's not that You and I had this conversation off camera, and we'll continue it next
Yeah.
week on camera. It's not that data products are going to take over the world, but there's definitely, there are certain tiers. There's certain basically sort of, tiers of importance where data products, will come in. And IBM has also been, playing, in the same game there.
Yeah. And what I argued, and we'll get into this later, is that to make data products really work, it's about standardization and interfaces and
Right.
security controls, basically. So we'll dig into that next
Yeah.
time.
There was one other broad trend that I saw with the
Yeah.
vendor announcements, which is hybrid multi-cloud. And
Yeah.
this is something where the hyperscalers really do not have an answer. And for what it means is that, the hyperscales are certainly I guess kind of dominating the narrative. But the fact is that, even for companies and like I said, some leading financial institutions, for instance, that are going very heavy on cloud, there still is going to be some data that is going to remain on premises for many
Yep.
reasons.
Yeah.
There's also a lot of issue about sovereign clouds that kind of get into world geopolitics, which is, I think, kind of above our pay grade here. But this is where Oracle and IBM have become very proactive, and it's
Yeah.
driving their growth. I mean, both
Yeah.
of them have been having stellar quarters. These are companies which the conventional wisdom counted them out.
Right.
These folks are, I mean, like, they are going big guns. Wall Street is very bullish on both of them. For instance, Oracle has a pipeline. I think it's, RPO, which is required performance obligations, that's going over 100% of their run rates. So it's maybe doubling over last year. I forget exactly what. I'll double check it before we convene next time. But the fact is, what it recognizes is that there are going to be many different places. It's like data, or I should say, AI and analytics. Have to go to where the data is, and there's going to be a significant amount of that data that's going to be on prem. Or in the case, with Oracle, especially to lesser extent IBM. IBM has really, gone full and all in on its partnership with AWS. But with Oracle, they're going all in on their partnerships with all three clouds. And,
Yeah.
and more to the point, all three clouds are going all in. Even AWS, which was basically, I mean, talk about co-opetition.
Right. And I think the broad theme here that I'm seeing this season is just interop. And that
Yeah,
goes with sharing data, that goes with allowing other people's hardware inside your cloud. I think a couple of years ago, all the hyperscalers wanted to own everything and push everyone else out. And now they're starting to acknowledge that is a losing strategy. If you try to do that,
yeah,
then they're going to go to someone else who will interoperate. And so they all want to play nice with other clouds even, but also with the old school vendors that actually have a lot of cloud.
gotcha. I think at this point we're kind of at a stopping point
Yeah,
because
let's
you've
stop here.
identified some incredibly profound trends that, of course, way beyond me. But that's our reply. That's where I rely on you, because you're the guy who goes. You're the deep guy.
Uh, I don't know
You are
about that.
you are
I'm
you
the
are
in the
deep,
trenches
Matt.
guy. In the trenches.
You've been in the trenches. You know this crap.
it's, a,
But
it's a winning
anyways,
combination. Yes.
yeah. So I mean, that's kind of a capsule of just some of my impressions, from the first half of the year in terms of what the vendors are talking about. But there's some deep undercurrents, and that's what we'll go into next week.
Fantastic. Okay. See you next time.
Okay, catch you later.
Take care.